Good evening, everybody. My name is Alex Clark, and I am delighted to welcome you to the Hay Festival online and to this evening's event to talk about our May Book of the Month, which is China Room by Sunjeev Sahota. It is just fantastic to welcome so many of you, and I know that you're joining us from all over the place, from Chicago, from Sonoma, from Salisbury, from Wigan, from Montreal, and we are going to go on a journey tonight as we talk to Sunjeev about his extraordinary third novel. I'm going to welcome him into the Zoom right now. Hi, Sunny, there you are. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Alex. I'm really glad to be here. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very pleased to be talking to you about this book, your third book. I've been reading you for the last 10 years. Your first novel came out 10 years ago, Hours of the Streets, and then The Year of the Runaways, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It won lots of other prizes, including the Encore Prize, which is, I think, where we met, because I was on the jury, and I just remember us all being completely bowled over by that book. This, your third book, is very different from both of those two. And I'm just going to ask you to tell our audience a little bit about what it is and just explain a bit, just to say to all of you out there that Sunny and I are going to talk for half an hour or so, and we'd love you to ask questions. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. You ask via the chat function, and we will see what you come up with. But Sunny, just tell us about China Room.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex. So China Room it's about a place, about a room, the China Room, on a farm in India, and the two young lives that 70 years apart inhabit that place, and I guess are also in turn inhabited by it. So in 1929, Mehar is a new bride. She arrives at the farm not knowing which of three brothers she's been married to. Her life is entirely controlled, and she has to spend most hours in the China Room. But I'd say she's courageous. She's strong-willed. She's determined to, yes, discover the identity of her husband. But more than that, she's determined to walk her own path. So for her, the China Room, it's a place that she wants to flee. I guess it represents a subjugation in a way. But for her great-grandson, who arrives at the farm in 1999, the China Room offers a kind of sanctuary. I think it's for him, it's that final kind of formative year before he starts university, and he's a damaged young man. He's come to kind of process his pain and his past, and in doing so find something to connect with, I think. But I think for both of them, it's a summer of for both the young man and Mehar, it's a summer of fighting to kind of forge their own path. It's a summer of reckoning, really, and the book's kind of orbits that kind of idea. I think that idea of connection between these two lives and these two lives.
I mean, it's really interesting. Obviously, The Room you've taken as the title for the book, and it immediately gets the reader into that feeling of claustrophobia, particularly for Mehar, who is sharing this room, this very, very small room, with the two other women that she's arrived on the farm with. So it's basically sort of three brides for three brothers. And none of the women know who they're married to. And there's such a kind of sort of puzzle element to the book as we try to work out and they try to work out. But you get this kind of incredible feeling of the claustrophobia of this place. And I think you're just gonna give us a little bit of the tone of that, just by reading us a few paragraphs from the beginning of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is, I just say right from the beginning, so it doesn't require any context, but it gives, I think, an idea of what you're talking about in terms of the tone and the stifling kind of conditions out there. that the women are in at the beginning of the book. Mehar is not so obedient a 15-year-old that she won't try to uncover which of the three brothers is her husband. Already, the morning after the wedding, and despite nervous, trembling hands, she combines varying amounts of lemon, garlic, and spice in their side plates of sliced onions, and then attempts to detect the particular odor on the man who visits later that same night, invisible to her in the dark. It proves inconclusive, the strongest smell by far her fear, so she tries again after overhearing one of the trio complaining about the calluses on his hands. The concentration is fierce when her husband's palm next strokes her naked arm. But then too, she isn't certain. Maybe all male hands feel so rough, so clumsily eager and dry. It is 1929. Summer is erupting, and the brothers do not address her in one another's presence. Indeed, they barely speak to her at all. And she, it goes without saying, is expected to remain dutiful, veiled, and silent, like the other new brides. Spying from her window, she sees only the brothers' likeness. Close in age, they share the same narrow build, with unconvincing shoulders and grave eyes, serious faces that carry no slack, features that follow the same rules. The three are evenly bearded, the hair trimmed short and tight, and all day they wear loose turbans cut from the same saffron wrap. Most hours, the brothers will be out working the fields, playing, drinking, while she weaves and cooks and shovels and milks, until those evenings when Mai, their mother, says to her, raising a tea glass to grim lips, "Not the china room tonight." Stop there.
Thank you. And as the novel unfolds, we of course understand what the China room sort of involves, what going to the China room means for each of the women. I just wanted to ask you about the form of the book. It is, as I've mentioned, very different from your previous two novels. I mean, I think they were quite different from one another. Just tell us how this idea for a book with two separate time schemes, two different central characters came about.
Yeah, so form is something that's really kind of just paramount for me when I start. I can't even start to write a novel until I've got the form and the structure and the frame kind of there reasonably kind of built up. So I started off with the idea of Mehar's story kind of arrived first because it's based very loosely on some family lore about my own great-grandmother, which we might come to. But I started writing that story and I got so far into it and I kind of set it aside. I thought, this doesn't feel necessary in some way. It doesn't feel like it's really my story to tell in this way. I suppose because it didn't feel like there was nothing new there. It was a story set against the partition of India, and it's a kind of backdrop I knew a lot about, but it wasn't really taking me anywhere new. So I set it aside and I started writing kind of various other kind of starts to other novels. And this idea of a doppelganger was quite key to these kinds of other novels that I was writing, this idea of a double, which is something I've been interested in for a while. But what the double represents, kind of, it's such a potent kind of symbol for danger and the kind of the borderlines of various dream states. And the more I was starting to write about the idea of a double and doppelganger, starting novels with this kind of image, the image of the doppelganger just started to transmute and change, and it started to look more and more like a version of me. So I'd say the doppelganger kind of is still there in the final form of the book, but it's the doppelganger ended up being a version of me, actually, rather than an actual doppelganger of one of the characters. And I started writing this story with this kind of pseudo doppelganger, with this narrator, and I started thinking, hang on, what's this narrator looking for? What's his story? And it seemed to me like it connected with this story that I'd started of this character called Mehar. And this was probably 2 years after I'd started the Mehar story. And I dug this story of Mehar out again, this 10,000 words I'd written. And I thought, these stories are it seemed quite clear to me that these two characters are both looking for the same thing. They're both looking for freedom, for liberation, for a sense of home, but they're also both looking for connection, I think. And it seemed to me that not only are these two stories connected in their themes, but they're also characters who are looking for connection as well. It was one of the ways in which form and content really aligned for me. So that's when I started putting these two stories, these two strands together. And I think to really understand the novel, I think you do have to look at the form of the book. I don't think you can just put these stories side by side and do a kind of compare and contrast. They are very deliberately entwined in a certain way. They spiral around each other, I think. And that spiral, as the novel goes on, gets tighter and tighter. And by that, I mean that we start off with quite longish chapters in each. We start, within each strand, but then the alternation between the two stories does get quicker and quicker until at the end, the narrator of the 99 strand actually does insert himself into the historical strand, just in one sentence, which is easy to miss, but it's there, which I think does raise questions about authorship and who gets to tell this story and who is telling this story, actually, who is actually telling the story of this character called Mehar. And then the spiral for me is completed by the photograph at the end, which is a kind of consummation of everything that I think the book is trying to talk about. So I do see the form as being a kind of a spiral, and this idea of connection, not just the stories being connected, but the characters seeking connection. So those, and there's other things to do with form. I mean, I could talk about structure on this book just all day long. Ideas of the fact that Mehar's story is written in the present tense, which is really important, I think, because for me that present tense, it points to not just her trauma, but also the trauma to come for her great grandson. It points both ways. I think in some ways I do see the present tense as being this kind of uncontained tense. It kind of like it spills out of the moment that it's writing about into what's to come. So
do you feel in that way that historical writers of what we call historical fiction will often say, well, there is no such thing. You're always writing from where you are. You are writing sort of two bits of historical fiction in a way, aren't you? You're looking back 20 years to this end of the millennium story of a young man, and then back, well, nearly a century ago. But you're writing from here. And I wonder if that informed the way that you brought these two stories that didn't start life as the same book, but became it.
Yeah, I don't see them as... I never really sat down thinking I'm writing a historical fiction. I never saw the novel in those ways. I'm not sure in what ways. I never sit down and think I'm writing a particular kind of book. I wanted to write a story from her, about her life, and it is quite an... though it has a kind of, a political backdrop, which is the kind of burgeoning Indian independence movement, which reflects also what's going on in the house on the farm as well. There's a parallel there, but in the sense that the novel set across 3 summers. It's the summer of 1929, the summer of 99, and also the summer in which the narrator starts writing the book it's July 2019, and that is me. I'm quite clear that narrator who starts writing the book is me, but then that self does get refracted through time and memory into the form of the book and into these other selves in these other pasts. But all these pasts are all on top of each other. I don't see one as being particularly more historical than the other. They coexist, not even side by side. They coexist like within and without, I think.
You mentioned there that the political situation in India in 1929 is it sort of surrounds that part of the narrative, and indeed the whole book, doesn't it? It's not frequently addressed really head on in kind of lengthy sort of parts of the book, but it's very much, the atmosphere is it's very much part of it. The picture that you paint of England at the end of the 20th century is much more sort of overtly political. Your narrator, the young man who has come to see his family in the Punjab, recalls a childhood of discrimination, of deindustrialization, of people being absolutely broke, unemployed, left behind in a way, and that's very strong. I know that an interview that you gave just when the book was published, you know, you talked about how little we talk about class in Britain, and I'm really interested to get sort of more of your thoughts about that and how it related to you writing this book.
Yeah, class is something that I always felt quite keenly growing up as a working class young man in a very working class neighborhood, in a neighborhood, as you say, that had been decimated by policies of the time. But yeah, it does strike me that we don't talk about, I mean, there's less than 10 working class MPs in Parliament, but no one seems particularly sort of concerned about that or wanting to do anything about that. And I think that's a shame, because I think class can really be a kind of a force for solidarity, actually. If we really want to make change and we want to actually make reach that better world, then I think that kind of solidarity is, and that's sort of that cuts across identitarian lines, is really important and can really work well for us. And it doesn't get spoken about, partly because there's no sort of, the language of the politics of solidarity, the politics of universalism, the politics that speaks about, the socioeconomic world we live in is not there anymore. It's kind of, it's not something that is voiced, really, is voiced at all. And because we don't have that politics, that idea of that politics of solidarity, it means that ideas of class are also seen through, whereas ideas of class used to be seen very much through a socioeconomic lens, they're now seen through much more of a cultural lens, and even a racial lens, actually. So we get phrases like the white working class, and academics and journalists will use that phrase completely unproblematically. And I think it's a deeply problematic, I find, phrase, because we don't talk about a brown working class or a black working class, because if you're brown, then you're in that particular category, and if you're working class, you're in, it's kind of assumed that you're in a white working class category. And I find talking about class in these kinds of, through a cultural lens is one of the ways in which it stops us building those structures of resistance that we need to improve, life for the people that need it improving most, I think.
I mean, in the book, in the part of the book that deals with the narrator, and I say that knowing that all the parts of the book actually refer and reflect and refract from one another. But that the life that the narrator leads, the exclusion he feels, the discrimination he feels, and what he sees happen to his parents, who are extremely badly off, really struggle financially, and then have a layer of prejudice and discrimination and racism placed on them. That directly leads to his trauma, and you trace that very, very directly, don't you? When we meet him, he is at the age of 18 with theoretically a very bright future ahead of him, quite broken. And I thought that was a very desolate part of the book, and I just wanted you to sort of explain how you sort of created that character's story.
Yeah, you're right. He's witnessed quite a lot of pain, and his parents' pain as well, and he's not able to sort of bear it, really. And I think the feelings of exclusion and the feelings of loss that he feels, I don't think he can quite understand it. These are quite abstract, large feelings, and I think his turn to addiction, he turns to heroin, is a way of trying to give form to those abstract feelings by putting them in a vial, really. I think it's as something as simple as that, to try to make sense of them by giving them, by putting them into this thing that he can, that he can see, that he can like look at and go, that is my pain. And I think so I think in that sense, heroin becomes a kind of home for him. I feel like, I don't think he takes heroin to kind of like to obliterate the pain or to get rid of it, because there is that moment. The first time he jacks up, he goes home, he goes upstairs and he looks in the window and he can see his vague reflection. And he says, for the first time, looking at myself, almost felt wonderful. I think that's the phrase. And so it's almost like it makes it bearable for him. And I think that's all. I do honestly think that's all addiction is. It's always an attempt to try to, a misguided attempt perhaps, but it's always an attempt to try to manage your thwarted desire. It's always an attempt to kind of house your existential stagnaces. I feel that's always what it comes down to. And this searching for home, I think it's mirrored in Mehar as well, who also has never had a home. She's carried from the home she grew up in to her husband's home, but there's no sense that she has any place there at all. She's desperate to, one of the reasons why she's desperate to escape is so she can have her own place. She's got it yarded with a square of neem trees. So they're both characters searching for that freedom, for that connection, and for home really as well.
I mean, thinking of Mehar, one of the things that was actually a very kind of strangely very optimistic part of the book was the way that you wrote about her sexuality and about the fact that she is in this marriage that she hasn't chosen. She doesn't even know who to, because she doesn't know which of the brothers initially that she's married to. And there's a very kind of difficult thing in a way for the reader to take in, which is that a lot of this is controlled by another woman, by her mother-in-law. And then suddenly there is a flowering of her sexuality. And it seemed to me that's a very euphemistic thing to say. What I'm really trying to say, I suppose, is she really discovers she loves to have sex with the man that she has sex with. That was a kind of quite a really interesting choice. Again, I wonder if you could say something about that.
Yeah, no, it's so from the first line, I think we do see Mehar as just being a really strong-willed young woman, determined to sort of undermine society's and her family's attempts to control her. And she is the most curious of the three new brides. And she does want to be free of the China room, but also as the summer goes on, and I think this does start to happen as you say that, she wants to be free to fully kind of acknowledge her own desires and her right to feel desire and to take control of her personhood. I think she's an astonishingly brave young woman, but in some ways it's that very yearning to be free that blinds her to the danger kind of staring her in the face as well, I think. She does, her relationship with Suraj for me is really kind of, because I sometimes see the story their relationship described as a love story, and perhaps it is. I think the reader will decide how much they do really love each other or not. But for me, it's interesting that these gendered power dynamics, the modern reader will see the power structures and the power dynamics at play in their relationship, but obviously it's different for them and for her in 1999. But even though it might be different, it's interesting to me how much their relationship is corrupted by these power dynamics, that she might profess her love to him and she might think she loves him, but she's also projecting her own desire for escape onto him as well. She very much wants to leave, and in some sense she does see him as a vehicle for her escape. And that's something that I think is their kind of bubbling away under the surface of their love story, that how much is actually she using him to get away, and how much is he using her to because he has his own desire to sort of destroy the world. He says that he's the youngest of three brothers. He feels he has no say in his life, and for him, though he might say he loves Mehar, he's also projecting his own desires onto her. So these as we would call it, these power dynamics, these gendered power dynamics, do, I think, corrupts their love in quite a key way, I think.
The other thing, of course, that it's always very hard to think yourself into when you're a person like me of great antiquity, and you are also older than, not as much older, but you are older than, they are children. Both of the characters in both of these stories, they're teenagers. Very hard to think yourself into that. We know, you, the writer, obviously knew, And we know as the reader that there are whole lives coming down the line for them. You mentioned, of course, that there is a kernel of this story that comes from your own family history. I just wonder, kind of thinking about those antecedents of yours at this time of such youth, must have been quite the kind of imaginative stretch.
That's kind of like the fun part of it, almost, just like trying to like think what it might have been like. I mean, so the story about the kind of the family law that I was kind of latching onto is, I suppose there's three elements to it. The first was that there was a great grandmother who was married to one of four brothers. Actually, there was one of four brides married to four brothers, and none of them knew which husband she was married to until they saw who held which baby a year later. So the story goes. How this story has been embellished over the decades, how family law kind of takes turns, we don't know. I don't know. So there was that, and it was always spoken about with a degree of levity in my family. That story, this idea of these innocent ancestors, but it always just felt like quite a dark story to me, trying to imagine what it might have been like for a young girl, because they were all, they would have been, 16 at the most when they got married, what it might have been like for her living in that room. And that room still exists. It's still there on my family's farm in India, and it's still got bars on. It's used as a grain store now. So to have that physical kind of space there, I think helped me. Kind of, as I frequent India pre-pandemic, I'd go there almost annually. So to have that physical space there, I think, and standing in it and just like being in it, I think helped. It does something to actually see that space and imagine what it might have been like to see that stone slab, to see the ashy, grimy circle on the floor where they might have cooked. It does, it reifies or vivifies it in a way that I think perhaps pure imagination might not have been able to. But the imagination part is that's kind of the fun bit, where you can just sit down and kind of build the story up from scratch. That's the bit I kind of enjoy. It's the writing part that's hard, really.
Well, I guess it always is, and I'm thinking about. It's funny you say that. I mean, I've said that your books are very different, and I mean, thinking of The Year of the Runaways, which was a book of so many voices, and it was such a noisy book in a way. It was so it was a cacophony of voices, although its characters were isolated and quietened, and there was the same claustrophobia. I mean, you set yourself tasks as a writer, don't you? You have done in each of your three books. You set yourself hard tasks to puzzle out.
I think for me, it's the only intellectually honest way to write is to just reach beyond what's already been illuminated, try to get into that dark space that's not been spotlit, or perhaps, and I think that's why when I said that I started writing the story of Mehar, and the reason I stopped writing, because it just felt familiar. It felt like there was nothing new there. And I think the older I get, and that seems to be more and more what I want, what I crave is just newness, just as a reader, as a writer, just newness in subject matter or in style or in form, or just give me something, in language, just give me something new. That seems to be what even if it doesn't work, try it. That seems to be what I really respond most to. And the three books are, they are different in the sense that they're trying to do different things. I suppose there are, as you say, just quite commonalities as well. I think stylistically, just in terms of my language, there's I always get told I write really in a restrained way. My language is really restrained, or in some sense, and I'm never quite sure, because I never feel like I'm being restrained when I'm writing. I don't sit down thinking I'm going to write in a really restrained way. I always think I'm letting it all hang out. I always think I feel totally kind of like exposed. I always feel like it's like I'm standing outside in a threadbare t-shirt in a howling gale. I feel that exposed when I'm writing. And then you see people, you write in a really restrained, unemotional way. I don't think I do. I think I write in quite an exposed way. One of my friends who's a translator, which might be telling, when I was having this conversation with him, he says, no, you're not restrained. What you are is you write books of strained intimacy. And I think that feels kind of I can get on board with that. It feels close to this strained into me. There's always this tension in my books between kind of longing and knowing. Like, it was like, I think that sense of something might go wrong, but you kind of you hope it won't go wrong, and between characters as well. So I think all three books contain this idea of strained intimacy. I think it's hailstoning here, by the way. So sorry if you can hear it.
I thought something, but well, there we are. But I think it's stopped now. Maybe. Just a question I wanted to ask you, since you started talking there about writing, there's, and this is a kind of, me asking sort of personal, this really intrigued me about the book. Forgive me, indulge me, audience, and we're coming to your questions right after this. But when the narrator, the young man, goes off to India to see his uncle, he goes with and he's in a terrible state, as we've said, he goes with a sack of books on his back, and they're Natalia Ginzburg, and they're Malcolm Lowry's Under the Volcano, which is a great sort of narrative of addiction and disarray. And I was just really interested about those books and how you packed his sort of rucksack full of books.
Yeah, well, he actually starts, those are the books he takes in 2019, when he arrives at his parents' house to help his dad with his recovery from his knee surgery. And you're right, those were the books I had with me when I went back to help my parents during that time of my father's surgery. And I suppose, they're books whose kind of, they're about things I'm interested in. Malcolm Lowry, Geoffrey Furman, I think he's one of the great British characters. He's up there with Jean Brodie. He's such a brilliant character. But what I love about that book is it's not so much how it talks about addiction, but also just its structure, its narrative methodology, the way it's set across 12 days, and each day is very, which I think comes back to what I'm saying about how much structure and form is important to me, and the framework of the book. And I've read that book. I read that book for its patterning, almost, actually, as much as for its content. And Natalia Ginzburg, I think she writes wonderfully about kind of Britain in the 60s, and the railway station, and the cabbages, and the washing lines, and the way she just writes so vividly. And she has this, I'm deeply attracted to kind of writers who write with a kind of terse lyricism, bordering on severity. That kind of language really gets me in quite a deep place. And I think her style is something I really respond to quite strongly, I think.
Thank you. There we are. I could talk to you about those books for a long time, but we must take some audience questions. Thank you so much. There's loads have been coming through. Somebody asks, which contemporary writers inspire you?
Oh yeah, it's great. I love Brian Washington. His novel Memorial is a beautiful love story. Again, his style is very spare, very lyrical, quite terse, but just it's every beat hits its note. I do, and I teach his short stories actually to students as well. So that's like. I'm a big fan of South African writer like Damon Galgut. I think the way he talks about the way politics enters the home and in the bedroom in his work, I find is really, really brilliant, and kind of like and kind of edifying in a way that sometimes books that talk about politics don't quite manage to be. He's kind of not edifying, but kind of almost like this spiritual kind of sense I have when I read his work, where he's able to make politics, so just enter every facet of someone's life without it kind of overwhelming them, and then the personhood kind of still being there. Damon Galgut, Brian Washington, and Rachel Kushner I loved her last novel, The Mars Room, again as well. But yeah.
Thank you very much. And do you know, he's obviously going to get the prize as the writer's writer. I think Brian Washington, when I've asked similar questions, or they've been asked to writers that I've interviewed in the last year or so, everybody says, I'm reading Brian Washington. So I think he's a recommend from lots of other brilliant writers. Nice. We also have a question from Jude. How did you go about researching the time period for the 1920s part of this story? And as you said, it was a time of great kind of political turmoil, really. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, also I've always been interested in the Indian independence movement and in partition. It's interesting that we call it partition as much as we do independence. Just that I think it's just emblematic of the kind of just how much of a rupture and how severe kind of like the whole event was, that we do still call it partition as much as we do anything else. So I've been reading about and learning about and listening about stories about partition independence my entire life, and that's because my family was very much affected by partition. So one branch of my family was on the side of the border that became Pakistan, and so when the border came into effect, literally overnight, my grandmother, who died 3 years ago, she had to flee her land, leave everything behind, and she had to spend a week trying to get across the border, hiding in fields under the cover of darkness with a newborn child. I think she was 6 months pregnant and also had a newborn child who she tried desperately to keep quiet so they wouldn't be heard lest they be discovered and killed. And she'd tell me those kinds of stories of what she saw and witnessed and what was going on throughout my kind of childhood and adolescence into my adulthood. So those stories were always very much kind of there. And so reading around it was always not so much for research purposes, just because I just wanted to know, it seemed quite an important historical event that had a massive impact on, the people I love and the people I care about. So I didn't have to do that much specific research for the book because I felt like I'd been doing it my entire life anyway. Mm. And also so much about, it's a cliche to say that India lives in several centuries at the same time, but it does, and parts of India, particularly in the part of India that my family live in, a very rural part of Punjab, so much about its attitudes and its practices haven't particularly changed over the last 70, 80, 100 years. And also because I do still have a grandmother living on that farm or near that farm, I could always talk to her about what life might have been like, what it was like for her when she was a young girl, and what it was like for her mother. So it was that kind of oral research, I think, was what fed into the book as much as any book research, I'd say.
Thank you. Brock asks, do you ever find yourself worrying about how much politics to weave into a story? And do you have a vision of how you'd like the audience to feel interpreting these issues in your novels? It's an interesting set of questions there. I think because I'm always I'm led by form and I'm led by character. And so if I have those two things at the forefront of my mind, I kind of trust that the politics will kind of take care of itself, that I won't need to go, that I'm not in danger of overwhelming it. If it's not something that's not true to how the book would speak of it or how a character would speak of it, then I think I kind of back myself that I'm not going to shoehorn in too much politics. And also, in this book in particular, politics is almost, it's the political backdrop of the 29th Strand. It feeds into the house, as you said, into the atmosphere of the place. So the secrets, the mistrust, it's all very much of a piece of the political background. And it's kind of, so it's interesting how what's going on in the house mimics what's going on in the wider country, not in any sort of overt way, but I'd say in the strange atmosphere of that place. And there's a parallel there with how we all were with each other in England post-Brexit, where you'd meet your neighbours and you'd be wondering, how did you vote? What did you do? And you wouldn't quite, there's this sense of how that politics kind of stepping into your relationships with people. That's how I see politics in my novels. It's just how does it impact
in your house, in your bedroom, in your relationships with people. We don't sit around having conversations, about, I don't know, about the ins and outs of Article 50, but we do talk about the psychology behind it, the psychology about why you voted in the way you did and why you did the way you did. And that psychology is what I think novels are just boxes of thought, really. That's all they are, what novels I think can really do.
Thank you. Julie asks, she says, you've such a strong sense of empathy in your writing. Does that come naturally, or do you spend a lot of time perfecting it? That's a really great question. Do you spend a lot of time perfecting your empathy, or is it you're just a really great guy?
I'd love to know how I could go about well, there is something about how, the novel does present the best version of the writer. The novelist, this is kind of like the best. My books are the best version of me. It's me at my most sympathetic and at my most empathetic and at my most sort of able to give. Whereas in real life, of course it's a different story. You're late for stuff. You're trying to get things in on time. You're sometimes a bit rude to someone when you don't mean to be. You're kind of a bit cranky when you shouldn't be. You shout at someone you shouldn't shout. But that's all. But the novels are kind of the opportunity for you to actually, for me, to be kind of like the best person I can be. But it's not like it can't be like that, outside, in life, really.
Well, I know what Julie means, though. There's a sense of really sort of being in somebody's pain or desire or sort of anxiety.
I'm attentive to it. And I think it's my job to be attentive to to a character's worldview and to kind of sit behind their eyes. I think that's absolutely, that's paramount. And if that's all in service to the work, really.
It's sort of related. It's a question from somebody who doesn't give their name, but it kind of empathy from a different view in a way. How does it differ writing as a woman versus a man? And of course, very obviously, you used a different point of view. You used third person and first person, but just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, my approach to writing any character is probably woefully kind of simple-minded. I just assume that all my characters, no matter their kind of like their background or their gender, have access to all the feelings and emotions that any other character is. They might not be able to voice them or act upon them or externalize them in the way that, or in this book, the female characters might not be able to externalize them in the way that the male characters can, but they can certainly feel absolutely as aroused or as ambitious or as calculating or as deceived or as happy as any other character. I think once I start with that idea, then I don't, and perhaps this is, perhaps I should rethink it, but I don't feel any compunction about stepping into any other kind of life that is different from mine. I think I do make that assumption. I think, and inevitably I will get things wrong, but I think making that leap into the other and trying to make that leap and trying to see things from that other it's worth getting things wrong. I think the price is worth it. Yeah.
The sort of risk that you've got to take. We are coming short of time, coming to the end, but there are two unanswered questions, and I can't have that, audience. So Sophie says, it's so lovely to hear how your family have inspired your stories. She's curious to know if they've read your work and what their reactions have been. Now, the ambiguity of language, I don't know if read your work as in read this book or have read your work more generally and what their reactions have been. And then she says, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah. No,
I don't think he does, mind you.
No, I don't mind at all. My family are, they're very proud, and they're happy that I'm making a go of this writing thing. But if I'm honest, my wife is a big reader, and she's, and that's important, and that we have each other's support. But if I'm honest, my books don't really take that much space in my family's life. Me as a writer doesn't really take that much space in their life. I think they're kind of saying that's something that Sunjeev does, and he enjoys it, and he clearly gets meaning from it, and bully for him. But it's not something that I think kind of intrudes on their life too much. And if I'm honest, that's probably something I've encouraged and I've kind of made happen. I find talking about my work with the people close to me just really I do just clam up. I find it completely exposing, and I find that I think they're just seeing into me. Anyone who tells me, if I meet someone in person and they say they've read my work, I feel as if I'm just an X-ray at that moment, that they can see right into me and they know everything about me, and things I just, which things which are on, I put in the page, but you don't kind of want in other people's heads for some reason. So my family are completely supportive, but I'm also thankful that I don't kind of encourage them to read me or read my work.
Gosh, that's a really, I must say, it's always great to talk and learn things. I've read all your books and I've learned so many things just from talking for the last half an hour that hadn't occurred to me. And I must say, I didn't quite see you as somebody who felt that when they were writing, felt like they were kind of standing in a t-shirt in a howling gale, or you saw people as an X-ray.
I think people see me as people see.
Yes, sorry, that's what people see into you as an X-ray. And I just want to say, that your readers who aren't related to you, so I don't think we do. I don't think you should feel like you're wearing a t-shirt in the rain. Uncomfortable.
I have been known to say that my perfect kind of state would be for everyone to buy my books, but for no one to read them. I think that would be
Okay. A final question, and again, you don't give your name, although please feel free to identify yourself now if you'd like to. We'll say this is from all of us. What's the best advice you were given as a writer? It might be me advising you not to feel like you're standing in the rain, but I don't suppose it is. Do you have something that really helped?
That's something that really helped. I don't know what I think it's maybe be patient. Work. I suppose simply put, it's. I can't remember who gave it, or whether I read it, or whether it's something. It's just work hard, be kind. I think that's pretty much it. I think if you do that, you'll be fine. Read, work hard, be kind, and I think if I do that, I think I'll be all right. And I think and be patient. I suppose being patient with yourself and actually letting the work arrive and I think I finally learned that when I start a novel, I'm going to take lots of detours and things are going to go wrong, and I'm going to start again several times. But that's just the way I work, and I think it's important to find the way that works for you. And for me, it is being patient is kind of key, letting it come to you and trusting the narrative, knowing the narrative will come. Narrative is so generous. Narrative will give you so much if you do just sit with it and in solitude and give it time. It will give you the answers, but you have to be patient. I think that was probably a good piece of advice that someone might have given me at some point.
That's really great advice. I'm possibly think that might be adaptable to kind of great life advice as well. The sort of sitting with something is probably great life advice too, but I'm sure is great for writing. Thank you so much for talking to us, Sunjeev. It's been a huge pleasure. I do recommend everybody to buy China Room, which you can buy via the website here, the Hay Festival website, or from a local bookseller, of course. I'd also really recommend you to buy his previous books, Ours Are the Streets and The Year of the Runaways, because they are terrific. Thank you, all of you out there. Thank you too if you've donated to Hay to allow us to keep on going. You can do that through the website. You can also attend the Hay Festival The Big Thing, which is coming on the 26th of May until the 6th of June with over 300 writers and performers. It's all free. And next month's, the June book of the month is Shape by Jordan Ellenberg. And details of the chat and the questions will be up pretty soon. But Sunjeev, thank you so, so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you this evening. And I hope you begin to sit in solitude with the next novel before too long. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.